द वे फॉरवर्ड इस ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਪਿਛਲੇ ਹਫ਼ਤਿਆਂ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਟਰੰਪ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਸੀ ਬਾਰੇ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨਾ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤਾ ਸੀਗਾ। ਇਸ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਟਰੰਪ ਦੀ ਪਰਫਾਰਮੈਂਸ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਵਿੱਚ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਨਵਾਈਟ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ ਸਾਡੇ ਚੀਫ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਕਲ ਐਂਡ ਬਿਜ਼ਨਸ ਕੰਟਰੀਬਿਊਟਰ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਗੁਰਸ਼ੇਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਗਿੱਲ ਜੀ ਨੂੰ। ਗੁਰਸ਼ੇਰ, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਬਹੁਤ-ਬਹੁਤ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ।
Thank you, Harjot.
Gursher, thanks for taking out the time to speak with us. Gursher, ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਟਰੰਪ ਦੀ ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਤੇ ਜਿੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਚਾਈਨਾ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਫੈਕਟਰ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣ ਲਈ ਚਾਈਨਾ ਨੂੰ ਸਮਝਣਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਹੈ। ਸਾਨੂੰ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪਲੀਜ਼ ਦੱਸੋ ਕਿ ਕੀ ਸੋਚ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ, ਕੀ ਚੱਲ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਲਈ ਚਾਈਨਾ ਦੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਵਿੱਚ with respect to its neighboring countries and around the world?
So, Harjot, the way I think is, there is no standard policy of Trump administration right now, when it relates to, China, whether it's economic or geopolitical or Asia Pac as such. I think that, what's when I look at the international policy of this administration, I think some of the things they have done well in terms of tariffs, which is obviously has escalated the trade war with China. When it comes to the neighboring countries, when it comes to, China trying to acquire more land, or more space in the sea, the South China Sea, which is a disputed region, or India per se, whether it's Japan, Vietnam, India, and some of the other nations around the world, specifically in the Pacific region, also Australia. There's a long-standing dispute going on for that territory, and I don't think so there is a standard policy at place right now. I think that's a mess because we've been distracted with so many things off lately. For example, COVID, NATO has been the other one, and the trade war in itself is a big distraction as well.
Gursher, before we talk at more length about China's policy vis-a-vis US and Trump's policy vis-a-vis China, let's try and understand China a little more. Can you explain us what happened recently between China and India? We understand there was some conflict on the borders right there. Can you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so there's a lot going on with China, especially with the current premier Xi Jinping. As you know, he has been given pretty much a free rein in terms of country's administration and overall political situation. He's obviously the undisputed leader in China right now. So when it comes to its neighbors, whether it's specifically in India and others, China has been extremely bullish in the border regions. So if you talk about specifically with India, I mean there was a standoff and a skirmish in the middle of June, in the Ladakh region, which is the line of actual control. It's not really a border. So the so-called border between India and China, and that area is called LAC, which is the line of actual control, and towards Pakistan it's line of control. It's LOC. So what it really means is that there's not a defined international border over there. There has been a dispute both by China and India in that region as to where the actual border is. And, since the 60s, after the war, India and China has agreed to call it LAC. And basically it's a demarcated area where Indian troops and Chinese troops patrol on a regular basis. So what really happened in June was there was a patrol of about 20 soldiers, which was doing a nighttime patrol, and these Chinese troops came prepared without guns because that's the treaty India and China has signed.
Yes, Gursher, I'm sorry. I'll still, we would seek a little clarification here, a little more understanding, which a military power like China and India being no less of a military power, why did we have these countries, soldiers fighting with each other with hands? Can you please explain a little more about that?
Yeah, so in 1996, there was a treaty between India and China, and the Article 6 of that really defines that, within 2 kilometers of area or from the LAC, so on the Chinese side and on the Indian side, the Chinese troop or the Indian troops will not carry weapons or use weapons or explosives or, any kind of combustible material. So that treaty has actually been enforced to date, with the exception of July, I think June 15th, where they did not use weapons, but they used something as improvised, metallic handles with nails, so one of our commanding officers or Indian commanding officer was killed, and subsequently Indian soldiers went on a rampage and killed, apparently 45 Chinese soldiers, which China does not agree to, but China even does not agree to its COVID numbers as well, because being a communist country. So that's what is going on in the Ladakh region so far.
So is it just a pure land grab? Is that what China is aiming at?
So China has been, if you look at history of India and China, especially with the border disputes, China has been trying to annex more and more land, whether it's Arunachal Pradesh, whether it's at some of the other bordering states across India, and specifically in Ladakh. If you see that, above Ladakh, Pakistan has already ceded a lot of land to China, for its Silk Route efforts. And, so the Galwan region essentially gives a window to China to better control that region. Because not only in terms of strategic importance for military, but also the trade importance and the Silk Route initiative. So I think China has been doing that for years, not just with India, but India has for once and after a very long time taken a very hard stand on it, and has actually sent a very, very strong message to the Chinese administration that enough is enough. India is not to be toyed around, and I think that was needed, and I think that message is loud and clear for the other partners as well. Indian partners or U.S. allies.
So the situation begs for this question: how does U.S. view this escalation? Do they take a side on either way? What do they do?
I think so. Right after this, I think Mike Pompeo did mention and had a briefing and did support India and its cause. Obviously, because one of the main reasons is Trump administration has escalated its offensive, whether it's trade or economic or political, with China. But again, if you look at the pact between India, U.S. and there's a joint Pacific Treaty at place between Japan, India, and U.S. where we guys are jointly patrolling that area specifically to counter China, and now Australia is also involved in that.
So to understand the whole situation, we need to understand: does an army of a country like India can they withhold against China on their own, or do they need collaboration of all these countries, Australia, Japan, US, to be able to stand against China militarily?
So, that's a very interesting question. It depends upon really whom you ask. On papers, if you look at the strength of Chinese military, it is actually exceeds that of India. Whether you look at the Air Force, Navy, or in general the number of armed forces and soldiers they have. But what has happened over the last 15 years or so? Even though India lacks in modernization, Indian armed forces are on a daily basis engaged in counterinsurgency, whether it's the northeast, whether it's Jammu and Kashmir, whether it's on the Pakistan side of the border, or whether it's actively engaged in with Pakistan. So they are well tried and highly motivated, versus PLA, which has not actively seen anything. And specifically when you look at Air Force or the modernization of the Air Force and the fleets of the Air Force, because in today's day and age, it's the Air Force and Navy which is going to win you wars. I mean, gone are the days where soldiers will march on and without any support from Air Force and Navy. So even there was a study by Harvard School of Government that in today's day and age, if China has to actively engage a country like India in terms of war provocation, I think the balance is pretty even. You have more technology on the Chinese side, but you have highly trained and motivated soldiers on the Indian side, which has seen a lot of action in the last 25-30 years.
So does U.S. As is popularly believed, U.S. does joint military exercises with India, and the other countries. India recently acquired Rafale from France. Is there a broader Pacific strategy for these Western countries, for the U.S., for countries in Europe against China?
I think there is a broader Pacific strategy when you talk about U.S., specifically U.S., India, and Japan, and I think so. I think eventually Australia is going to be included. However, that started in the Obama era, and I think Trump has done a good job in actually extending it. So there is a broader strategy at play.
And I'm sorry, and is India a part of that coalition?
Yes, it is. So as part of that treaty, India has also given a lot of rights to the U.S. armed forces in terms of using strategic bases and military installation, whether it's refueling or port of entries and U.S. Navy vessels docking and shipping at Indian ports and Indian Navy installments and so on and so forth. So I think there is a strategic, and I think they also renamed U.S. also renamed its fleet on the Indian subcontinent name, specifically to send a message to China, in terms of the coalition and in terms of, they actively engaged, engaging these countries. About 2 weeks back, U.S. also deployed 2 of its, aircraft carrier fleet in the South China Sea, just, sending a message that this remains a disputed area and we do not cede to China, the South China Sea, where there are almost 3 military airfields which have been actively developed by the Chinese PLA Air Force.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are seeing these conditions on the ground, but I wonder if either of these countries can actually afford a war in the present economic situation. What do you say to that?
Certainly, I don't think anybody can afford a war because both are nuclear armed nations to start with. But the interesting thing which is coming out of COVID is that if you look at the only GDP which has grown in last quarter is Chinese and none of the other countries. So China, and there are a lot of conspiracy theories about COVID, but one of them is that China was well prepared to handle something like that, and none of the other countries were.
Mr. Gill, we will continue on that after a small break. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ The Way Forward. The Way Forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਸਾਡੇ ਇੰਟਰਨੈਸ਼ਨਲ ਐਕਸਪਰਟ ਗੁਰਸ਼ੇਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਗਿੱਲ ਨਾਲ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਟਰੰਪ ਦੀ ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ, ਔਰ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਸਮਝਣਾ ਚਾਹ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਚਾਈਨਾ ਨੂੰ। ਗੁਰਸ਼ੇਰ, So before going to the break, you were talking about all these conspiracy theories that are related to China, particularly in light of Corona and COVID. So the important question is, how is the world going to react to this Corona situation, vis-a-vis their manufacturing capabilities, both with respect to essential items such as ventilators, which could not be availed by many countries at critical times, and other regular items as well. I have not been able to get a bicycle for myself for 2 months now. So do you think the world is going to take another look at its policy of moving its entire manufacturing to China?
So, Harjot, long-term answer is yes. I think this has done a lot of damage to China's reputation in terms of helping and supporting and really calling out the COVID situation quickly, for the world to get prepared or react. But in the short run, we are also dependent upon China. US's trade deficit stands at $400 billion. So how do you bridge that overnight? It's going to take years to either find another manufacturing partner or multiple manufacturing partners or build internal capabilities, and that goes for India as well. I mean, you have seen, Mr. Modi in India has declared, a self-reliance and moving away from Chinese manufacturing, and also banning about 59 Chinese apps, citing the security reasons. But again, that has started, a thought process, in one of the biggest, actually the biggest democracy in the world. So I think, whether it's US or India, or whether it's the European nations, or whether it's the Middle East or whoever it is, I think slowly they'll realize that, China is going to become a bigger threat, because we are just feeding their political and their military establishment by buying more and more from China.
So is China indispensable at this stage, or we already have seen this manufacturing going to other countries? We hear that the biggest beneficiary of this whole corona situation have been countries like Vietnam, like Malaysia, where companies have actually moved their manufacturing units.
So I used to work for, I think the number 2 apparel and footwear company before, called VF Corp, till about 2 years back. And we had manufacturing based out of China. And we also had manufacturing based out of Vietnam and Bangladesh and some of the other countries. So yes, I think there is going to be repercussions. A lot of American companies which do leverage manufacturing, a lot of brands specifically, or whether it's iPhones or the bigger brands as well. But again, it cannot be done overnight. I mean, this, moving manufacturing capabilities and finding the right sourcing partners takes months or years in some cases, because, you have to adhere by a lot of, US norms and regulations in order to get certification to be a, sourcing partner for US companies. But you know what? I think this is a big wake-up call for corporate America, for the Congress or the government of United States and many other governments across the world. And I think that I'm hoping that this will fuel in a wave where a lot of nations across the world will start supporting some of the other countries which are not as bullish as China, whether it's military wise, whether geopolitical ambitions, whether it's currency manipulation and so on and so forth. So I think to answer your question, yes, it will trigger, but it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah. See, so the important question is, we understand that the corporate world, the companies then in themselves might be, willing to find new partners so that they don't run into these problems that they run this time. But the question is there going to be an action at the government level? Is at the policy level that do we need to decrease our dependence on China? Do you see anything like that happening in the near future? Not just by US, by other European.
Just to give an example,
countries.
That if you have to source something from China for the EU, you used to have about 5 to 7% on apparel and footwear back in the days. I don't know what the right number is right now because I'm out of that industry, but they used to exempt countries like Bangladesh because of a poor economy and not so developing economy. So steps like that. So if US has to actively respond or take actions in terms of finding new manufacturing partners across the world, you have to first address the duty rates. So and if the duty rates are favorable for companies, I think the companies will move out quickly. But you know what? The gap of $400 billion, it's going to take years to fill.
Do you see the reaction of companies and governments directed by anger towards China because of how they have handled this corona situation?
So not in U.S. Everything's driven by results on the Wall Street. So I don't think that it's going to be emotional. It's going to be led by policy decisions by the government and favorable policy decisions by the government, and subsequently, if the quality of products and services are equivalent or better in other countries, I mean, yes, the companies will be motivated to step out and look for better partners in different parts of the world.
You see, One of the very popular slogans by President Trump has been America First, and a big part of America First has been President Trump's actions against China. People perceived, people said that it's not easy to stand against China, and no one other than Trump would have stood the way he has stood. Can you tell us exactly what Trump has done to enforce what he said would be standing against China? What exactly is his policy against China?
So I think that a lot of Mr. Trump's policies are driven and are centric towards his supporters. Specifically, if you look at the farming base in the Midwest of the country, in the south of the country. So he's definitely
Didn't he hurt the farming community by all those tariffs?
Well, so in some cases he has reached out to China and asked the Chinese government to up the farming imports from United States, but that's not what we're discussing. We're discussing the larger policy. So I think tariffs has certainly been in favor of United States, but again, I think the lack of overall strategy to address either the Chinese, might of commerce and military has not helped the United States cause. I mean, case in point. I mean, if you look at John Bolton's book, I mean, he has cited several instances. Now, again, it's his opinion, and some people say he's done it for money, but in some cases, he's called out Trump's policy as being impulsive and to help his re-election campaign. So, and in some cases, you have a lot of political insiders who say that more could be done. Like, for example, there was Muslim suppression in China, and nothing has been done. No active steps have been taken. There's the lot of currency manipulation is the other one. But again, there's a lack of overall strategy to counter China. And I think it's more impulsive. It's more driven towards a political gain. It's not what's going to yield a 10 to 15 years long-term strategic solution for the United States.
But Gursher, when we talk of China policy, I think what this administration advocates they have done is putting those tariffs. Have those tariffs helped in any way? Even by bridging the international trade deficit, have those tariffs helped?
So it hasn't helped with the deficit. What it has done is twofold. One, maybe it has generated additional income for the government, which I think it has. But the incremental tariffs is also as a result being passed on to the consumer. So for example, you were talking about a bicycle to buy. If you have to land a bicycle from China without tariff, is going to be less money to you. It's going to cost you less. But eventually, the consumer has to pay the buck for it. So yes, I think that it may hurt in the short run, but it's going to hurt both United States and China at the same time.
And besides that, companies like Apple, they move their manufacturing, pointing case Apple 11 from China to India because China products in China are being there's a tariff imposed on them. Then China was importing a few things from US like soya beans, and they started importing it from Brazil. So I am not sure if those tariffs have directly helped, but we will talk more about this after a short break. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ The Way Forward. The Way Forward is ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਪ੍ਰੈਜ਼ੀਡੈਂਟ ਟਰੰਪ ਦੀ ਫੋਰਨ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਦੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਫੋਰਨ ਐਕਸਪਰਟ ਸਰਦਾਰ ਗੁਰਸ਼ੇਰ ਸਿੰਘ ਗਿੱਲ ਜੀ ਨਾਲ। ਗੁਰਸ਼ੇਰ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਆਪਾਂ ਟਰੰਪ ਦੀ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ ਵਿਜ਼ ਚਾਈਨਾ, जिसमें एडवर्सरी देखा जाता है, but कुछ लोग questions raise कर दें about President Trump's handling of relations with our allies as well. Recently, we have seen withdrawal of NATO troops from Germany. We have seen issues with NATO funding. ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੋਗੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ allies ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਸਾਡੇ ਜੋ relation and how has that worked under President Trump, and is there any truth to this? Some people allege that President Trump is playing at Putin's hands. ਸਾਨੂੰ ਦੱਸੋਗੇ something more about this?
So, to start with, as you may agree or not agree, but my opinion is that Mr. Trump has a certain amount of infatuations with dictators or strongman personalities, whether it's Putin, whether it's Erdogan in Turkey, whether it's Xi Jinping in China.
Mm-hmm.
So
and he has hinted postponing the elections this year as well.
So, I know. Yes. I mean, yes. Talk about that. But besides the point. If you see that over the history of the last 1 year or 2 years or 3 years of administration, Mr. Trump has tried to reverse every possible policy of Mr. Obama, and Mr. Obama enjoyed a very good relationships with the NATO members, specifically United Kingdom, Germany, France, and some of the others. Mr. Trump is not particularly a big fan of the German Chancellor. We all know that, and but one of the things which I agree with Mr. Trump is that. As per the NATO agreement, all members have to spend 2% of the GDP for NATO forces. Don't get me wrong, NATO is thriving. As a matter of fact, NATO has upped its budget in the last 5 years. So it's pretty strong by any means. The defense budget of NATO is only second to the United States. It's at about $300 billion, and that's far exceeds any other country except for the United States. So it's extremely strong. However, countries like Germany has not put in 2% of the GDP, which is obviously a tricky point with Mr. Trump, because he has one reason to not get along with the German Chancellor Merkel. So out of the 29 NATO members, only about 8 or 9 countries actually hit the 2% spot, and the United States actually funds 3.4% of our GDP and 70% of the military spending for NATO, which is quite a bit.
This demand for increase in their budgets, for these member states has been going on forever. Even President Obama made those demands several times. But has Trump been able to achieve that? Have they increased their budget actually?
I don't think he is. I believe he has not. I don't think that Germany has increased its spending and dramatically, or anybody else. But in the larger context, we need NATO more than any time in the past. Right. Right now, you have aggressive Russia. You have aggressive China. Everybody is. These two countries are trying to eat into every place or country which has strategic importance to the United States. So there's increased involvement of Russia in the Middle East, in Europe, across Poland. There are sorties going on by military aircrafts on a daily basis across Alaska, Poland, Finland, name it, right? And Russia's involvement in the Middle East, whether it's the Syrian conflict or North Africa, whether Libya is a case in point, and China is also becoming extremely bullish. So you need NATO more than ever right now. And I think this is not the right time to have that kind of discussion. I think that NATO discussions are better to be held in closed doors because of the strategic importance of NATO overall.
So what would you say to that allegation that President Trump has been playing at Putin's hands? Do you give any water to that?
There's a certain amount of truth to it. I don't know the reason why, but whether it's ceding ground in Syria or pulling out troops, U.S. troops from Germany, is directly playing into their hand. and also there were talks about reducing troops in Afghanistan, and we all heard about the Russian bounties on U.S. soldiers, and Trump hasn't addressed that with Putin or the government of Russia. So I think there's a certain amount of truth to it. I don't know the reason why, but I think that he doesn't want to address it.
The bottom line is, whether he's doing it intentionally or otherwise, Putin is definitely benefiting. Is that right to say?
Absolutely.
The other question I would like to ask you, President Trump had appointed his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, as in charge of the Middle East policy. How do you think that has worked out in the last 3.5 years of his administration?
I think in terms of selling equipment to the Saudis, it's worked pretty well, and to UAE, it's pretty well. But in terms of achieving something strategic in Middle East, nothing has happened. Neither has he been able to resolve the dispute with Qatar or any other strategic initiatives, whether it's the Palestine-Israel conflict. Nothing has been achieved. I think that it's definitely benefited, and in some cases for U.S. companies and defense suppliers. But other than that, I think strategically speaking, nothing has been achieved on ground.
Again, he's pulling out from Syria. Works directly to the benefit of the Russians. I don't know how deliberate is that, but maybe it's in line with his declared policy that he would reduce American interventions in foreign lands. Do you see it that way?
I think it's also to do with his re-election. So you're right that was one of his points he ran on. So I think he's trying to fulfill that. But I think there's more than what meets the eye. All of a sudden, we were highly involved in the Syrian conflict. You had U.S. aircraft carriers launching missiles on the Assad administration, and within a couple of years, the entire tone has changed, and you're pulling out troops, and you basically vacated Syria on the ground. We were supposed to support our partners over there, the Kurds, and we left them hanging. So what is the message we are trying to send in Middle East? That yes, U.S. is your partner. We are there to support you, but depending upon the administration, we can just leave you in the lurch. It has to be consistent across different administrations, and we have lost a lot of ground and face in the Middle East because of that.
Yeah, I believe that's the way it has always been, but maybe prior to this administration. What's going on in Libya right now with the Russians and the Turks coming in?
So Libya is an interesting place. I mean, with the fall of Gaddafi, there are basically two powers at stake. One is the UN accepted and approved government, and the other one is actually being supported by Russia. And interestingly, that side of Libya, which does not control Tripoli, is I think Mr. Gareth is, if I'm pronouncing it right, he's the leader of that, and Mr. Gareth has been supported actively by Russia and interestingly by France and some of the other countries, including Saudi Arabia and UAE as well. On the other side, you have this UN-led, which rules Tripoli, which is called the GHA or GAH. That is supported by Turkey. So Turkey's also getting more and more involved, in Libya, and so is Russia. So Russia is training one side, and Turkey is training the other side, and the conflict is going on. So it doesn't necessarily help the local people over there.
I don't know if this all can be seen as part of America First policy, or it should be seen as a withdrawal of American leadership from the world stage. We can't overlook other withdrawals from world treaties like the Paris Climate Treaty and now World Health Organization, Iran nuclear deal. We will talk more about that after a short break. ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ the way forward. द वे फॉरवर्ड इज ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਫਿਰ ਤੋਂ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਹੈ ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਹੋਸਟ ਹਰਜੋਤ ਸਿੰਘ ਗੁਰਸ਼ੇਰ another area where President Trump claimed some early success was North Korea. Can you tell us what's going on with North Korea?
So nothing has been achieved. There's nothing concrete which has been achieved with North Korea. I mean, I think Mr. Trump had multiple meetings with the leader of apparently Democratic Republic of North Korea, Mr. Kim Jong-un. But in terms of whether it's agreeing to dismantle their so-called nuclear capabilities and development of nuclear weapon, or a more harmonic relationship with South Korea and the neighbors, there's not really anything on document. So with the COVID breaking out, I think North Korea has taken a back seat, and with China being the forefront of the international policy, we're not seeing many activities. I mean, the recent activity was North Korea destroyed the building where they jointly used to have meetings with South Korean leadership as a message that they don't want to engage South Korea again. So the regime still is very elusive. You don't know much about it. You don't know what's happening over there, and very unpredictable. So I think
is there a known breakthrough the current administration can be proud of
with North Korea?
Yes.
Nothing.
Let's move on to Iran.
With the exception of exchanging friendly letters and Dennis Rodman going into the country and playing basketball, I don't think there's anything else.
Yeah, that's an achievement in itself. When we talk about Iran, we have seen President Trump dismantling a lot of structure that President Obama created, whether it was Paris climate change treaty or this Iran multilateral treaty. We have seen that in domestic policy as well. But when it comes to international policy, that was a signature international achievement for President Obama, and it is claimed that Iran has been adhering to the terms of the treaty, but President Trump withdrew from that treaty. I don't believe that he has replaced it with anything else. How is that withdrawing from the treaty working out with Iran?
I think it was more symbolic. And the fact that the other repercussions is that we still impose sanctions on Iran and Iranian companies, and U.S. companies are still not allowed to trade with Iran or in Iran. So essentially that's a loss for United States in terms of economics. But the treaty, I have not heard anything differently, that this treaty is still not in place. I think the other members of this treaty, which is Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, and the permanent members of UN, apart from the United States, which is Russia, China, France, and UK, and Germany as well, they are still adhering to this treaty. And as far as my knowledge goes, yes, there are expiration dates of when the treaty expires, and by when, I think 10 or 12 or 15 years, when beyond that Iran is allowed to enrich uranium for the purpose of defense. Till then, I think that the rest of the parties are still adhering to that treaty.
That presents a very a new situation, at least since the post-Second World War world, where America has led the world. It has provided leadership to countries across the world. And what we see here, at least in this situation, is America withdrawing from that treaty, but the other countries, whether it be Russia or even European Union, they have continued with the treaty, and it's claimed that Iran is still adhering to the terms of the treaty, even when US has withdrawn. We have seen such withdrawal of leadership by US in withdrawing from Paris climate treaty. I think India, US, and only one other nation, some South American nation, with only two nations that have withdrew from that treaty. Now US has withdrawn from a World Health Organization as well. Do you see some long-lasting repercussions of this withdrawal from leadership role by America?
There could be. If Mr. Trump comes to power again, it could be a long-lasting repercussions. But I believe that if the Democrats come to power, they're going to change that. I think that we're going to be sitting back on those tables and re-engaging the world and important institutions like WHO. If the administration is changed, I mean, you have to give Mr. Trump some credit that he vocally says he does not believe in science and the climate change, and he believes that windmills cause cancer and stuff like that. So he talks the talk and obviously backs it up with action. Yeah. But long term, if Mr. Trump's come back, Mr. Trump's party and he himself comes back to the power and remains president for another 4 years, then yes, we could lose a lot of ground in these areas and in these parts of the world. Yeah. But if 4th of November is going to decide a lot for this country, I guess.
Mr. Gursher, it's very important for us to understand when Trump says America first, and a lot of supporters say yes, we need to think about America first and not about other countries. When US intervenes in foreign countries, is US doing some kind of charity, or is it some kind of their own military or business interests that America is serving? It could be both, but it's not completely bereft of all US interests, is it?
It really depends upon the countries and areas and this thing. So I think it's not true. It's not a blanket statement for everything. Mm-hmm. More to do with America first is it's the right wing wave across the world. I mean, India saying India first, Russia saying Russia first. Mm-hmm. Mr. Boris Johnson, this thing is UK first, and he's withdrawn from EU. So you are seeing this wave across the world. I mean, Brazil is case in point. I mean, the president of Brazil did not believe in COVID, and he got COVID. I mean, he says Brazil first as well. So I mean, and Mexico is another case in point. So a lot of leaders, right-wing leaders, are riding on that wave, mm-hmm. and you've seen that increase over the world. So I think it's more to do with political gain than anything else.
So you think this rise in right-wing, this nationalism, is that does that have more to do with moving of the manufacturing jobs outside the borders of these nations, or it's more of an identity issue which these people are worried about?
I think it's both. Like if you look at US, I mean, people like you and me, we are immigrants, and we have come and enjoyed the American dream, and we continue to do that. Mm-hmm. And I think that people were worried about losing jobs to immigrants, and obviously the advent of technology made everything easier for the companies to outsource it to other parts of the world. Mm-hmm. So Mr. Trump has come in and stoked that fear, mm-hmm. And the rise of white nationalism and white supremacists is one example of it. Mm-hmm. However, I think that the core of the America was founded on immigrants. So I think the core is still very strong, and I think we're going to ride this wave. But again, you're seeing this happening all across the world as well. Mm-hmm. So nobody's to be blamed. I think it's the time and age of technology, and you mix it up with the kind of jobs which are remaining in the US. You see a lot of blue collar jobs getting outsourced, and it's easier to outsource mm-hmm. even more with the COVID situation, and the penetration of education in society in America is still very less compared to rest of the world, and specifically for, compared to the European countries.
With this,
And when I'm meaning education, it's the college education, not the high school education.
with this, the present world with greater connectivity, in this globalized economies, the world is standing at a threshold where it can take either path, and we all have to be very careful with which way we want the world to go, and we are part of that decision. That is why it's very important for all of us to make those informed choices in our national elections, in our local elections, not just in this country but across the world. Mr. Gill, thank you very much for taking out the time today to speak with us. We will be reaching out to you in the coming days, especially with a very important election looming over our head. Thank you very much for speaking with us today. AC ਸਾਡਾ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ ਦੇਖਣ ਦਾ ਬਹੁਤ ਬਹੁਤ ਸ਼ੁਕਰੀਆ। ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਮਿਲਾਂਗੇ ਅਗਲੇ ਹਫਤੇ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਦ ਵੇ ਫਾਰਵਰਡ।